And so what I'd also ask is that throughout this talk, please feel free to ask any questions along the way. We can have questions after, but feel free to have this be more of a conversation than it is than just a talk, right? Partly what I'm going to be doing, and let me just share this screen. I don't know why I have to share one or the other. So you can see that. Everybody see my screen okay?
Looks good.
Great. So what I'm going to be talking about is managing email through mu4e and other software. The way this is going to work is, as I said, I want this to be a bit more of a discussion. I want you to, if you have questions that you want to ask me, please feel free to speak up at any time. I'm going to be going through a guided presentation of actually setting up email in mu4e with the mu4e. This is going to be live coding, so what could go wrong? And don't worry, this isn't going to be too long. I've done a test run on this. I clocked in at about 2 hours. It's not too bad. Anyways, so I'm Eric Collins. I am one of the founders, the other founder is here, by the way, and the co-organizer of Emacs NYC. I'm an engineering manager at Parachute Health. If you are, they don't sponsor this, so I'm not going to bother with that. So let's do mail in Emacs. I couldn't think of anything else to put in here, so we're doing some cow say. Some of the things that we're going to be talking about here is sort of the different options in sending and receiving email that already sort of exist, how Emacs sort of fits into that, an overview of mu4e or mu4e and mu are mail utilities, syncing your mail locally, sending mail, setting up an email client in Emacs, storing and retrieving passwords safely, setting up multiple accounts, and signing and encrypting mail using your PGP key. It's a lot to go through, and as I said, there's going to be live code. There's going to be some discussion about sort of specific things there, so bear with me. I might gloss over a couple things, so if there's anything that you want more explanation of, please let me know. The software overview, as I said, is mu4e. I'm going to be sharing these files out after this as well, so that's why these all have links in them. This includes mu4e, which is going to be the thing that we are working with, as well as mbsync or isync. I think they're removing the name isync pretty soon. Isync was the project, and then MSMTP. I'll go into more details about what each of those are as we get into it. So there are lots of different ways to send and receive email right now. There's webmail, lots of different webmail providers. Gmail is a pretty popular option. I use Fastmail. Almost all of these have ways to manage these through other applications, such as dedicated GUI applications like Thunderbird being a very popular one in free software. There's dedicated command line options like MUT, very popular one for Vim users, it seems. And then there are tons and tons of Emacs clients, surprisingly the number of them. There are 3 that exist directly in Emacs itself that come with Emacs. So some of the built-in clients are GNUs, I believe that's how you say that, rmail. I feel like there's one that's also called MH or something like that. There are many more packages that exist to manage it too. mu4e, Wonderlust, not much, etc. Each approaches the problem a little bit differently, or each approaches mail a little bit differently. But all of them are pretty feature rich, and each comes down to personal preference. I personally have tried GNUs. I found it very confusing. Personally, I tried Wonderlust and found I couldn't really install it very easily. But I also didn't really have much of a will to actually try to set it up. If you haven't had a chance, or if you are interested to do this and are interested beyond this talk and this inspires you to try out email, I would recommend taking a look at the category mail in Emacs Wiki, linked here. It gives a good rundown of all the different options that are there, and there's a lot of different work out there to show how to set some of these things up. So for me, choosing the right option was trying to find something that had the most familiar interface, something that I could use in Emacs that required no mouse. I could use any number of email providers. Previously, I was working with somebody that had Gmail. I used personally Fastmail. I wanted to make sure that I could natively sign and encrypt emails with PGP pretty seamlessly, and had the comfort of knowing, of course, that I was using free software. And the main reason, I think, one of the bigger reasons as well with any of these things is that there's certain endless customization that can happen when you have something that's built in Emacs. I think that I want to make sure that it has a good solid base, but that customization is still important. Okay, so let's talk about MU or mu4e, however you're supposed to say it. There's no guide on how you're actually supposed to pronounce it, and I'm probably going to butcher the name of the person that created it. Dirk Jan C. Binema, I want to say, is the person that created mu4e or MU originally. It's been around since at least 2009, probably longer. That's the furthest back that I could find for commits, but it clearly moved over to Git around that time, and it looked like a lot of the back history of that was lost. And it didn't originally have an email interface, an Emacs interface. It was just a mail utility that was there to index for other front ends. So it was an index that could index email for not much. It could do it for GNUs. But then after that, it started building its own. It's a simple interface and backend. It provides really quick indexing, which gives you very powerful search using Zapier. And Zapier is a text search engine, a free text search engine program. I don't know too much about it, have not used it, but looks pretty cool. It looks very powerful. You can easily set up multiple accounts, especially around the time that I started using it. And most of the things get offloaded to the back end, or at least the way that I have it set up. So the actual workload on Emacs is next to nothing. The other thing that's really important, I think, with any project is that you want to make sure that it's active, and it happens to be a very active project. I think the last commit that I saw looking at this yesterday was a couple days ago. So, has a lot going on and a lot of people looking at it now. So, with that said, let's set up an Emacs email client in Emacs. I want to just point out really quick that the typical command that you'd go for getting this thing set up is mu4e, and that has alerting set up, but there's no actual client set up. So we're going to be doing this all together. But before we do that, let's talk about the email account. I've set up a temporary email account so that I'm not using my actual email account, so nobody's reading my actual emails at emacsnycfastmailcom. This matches what I have done. What I will say is that the FSF does not like Fastmail, so maybe don't use it, I guess. I just want to make sure everybody can still hear me, right?
We hear you fine.
Great. They said, as you can see here, sign up and sign in webmail all works smoothly. This is a paid service, a 60-day free trial. Update, was notified this is not the case. I don't know what that means. I guess it wasn't a free trial for them? Anyways, this is a temporary account. With any setup, there's going to be differences. Whatever setup you use, if you use Proton Mail, if you use another mail service, there might be a lot of different things that are different about this. They should be pretty similar and should have some basics, and we'll go into some of those things as we go along. The other thing that I'd ask is that if you are interested, please feel free to email me, because it would be great to see how we can manage these emails as we move along. Okay, so we are going to set up an account to sync locally. The important thing about this is that you have your web service, or you have your mail server. That mail server is fine, but querying for remote mail is a synchronous operation, and actually mu4e requires you to use a mail directory that is local to your machine. It requires you to have a local copy. I personally use something called mbsync or isync, which will sync a local copy with a remote copy with a local copy, or basically any IMAP store with another with another directory. Could technically, I guess, be a local IMAP store. Because it's on disk, it means it's much faster for querying for Emacs. It also means that indexing is a breeze. And as I said, it's a requirement for mu4e. So let's take a really quick look at this config. And I need to do that. So I hope everybody can see this okay. Isync configures things pretty simply. It can look kind of confusing when looking at it, but it's just not. You just have to get used to sort of the paradigms that it has set up. So there's each one. It programs in blocks, and it sort of figures that there's a new sort of configuration after there's a new line present. So in this case, I have things like my IMAP account, which I have it named as emacsnyc. I have it host because this is immediately after. This is configuring for this IMAP account. It's hosted on IMAP Fastmail. The user is emacsnyc@fastmail.com. The SSL type is IMAP. I'm going to show you something a little bit about how we can deal with passwords in a little bit. But for right now, I'm going to nix the password command that's there. And go forward with that. So we establish a name, a remote server, IMAP store, and then you establish your local store, maildir store. You name both of those things, and then you can set up transforms as far as how it's going to connect between the remote and local connection. So one thing to note here is that you set up I guess also a point here is that the path here is to point to your mail directory that you're using. The inbox is for your default inbox where all of your mail should be coming into. That is not automatically, that it would be sort of transferred out from there. The way this deals with it as well is that it takes sort of a default connection, and then everything else here, all these channels here sort of transforms from the remote capital A archive to the lowercase a archive. And each one of these things will then be put into a channel so that we can then say sync all of these all at once. So when I say mbsync emacsnyc, it will sync each one of these channels, all 5 of them. And so any questions about that before I move on? Cool. So now that we have that, I'm going to show you this. This is me syncing this thing. It's going to not work. I'm going to tell you that right now. I'm going to remove the mbsyncrc that I have for my local machine so that I'm not using my personal stuff, but we're using this email address instead. And so I'm going to run this. Ask me to run it. It will tell me that I can't do this because it needs to ask for a password. That's fine. We can type in mbsync --all here. This asks for a password. The one thing I also note is that I would not recommend using your your main password here. If there's some way that they can do app passwords, Fastmail does app passwords. I know Google does app passwords. There are other systems that allow you to use API keys or anything like that, or some sort of passwording system that is not using your main password. That is vastly preferred. Because it gives you a chance to limit a little bit how you're using these things. So for that matter, I'm going to paste this in. I'm actually going to show you the whole thing that it's going to show. And we're going to do this actually verbose, just so you see what it says. And so it synchronizes all of these things. It gets the emacsnyc default channel. It goes to the remote server, the local server. It syncs the inbox and makes sure that that's synced appropriately. Gets the transfers the remote archive to the local archive, all that stuff. So we have not too many new messages apparently. So C, I believe, is created. Oh no, those are channels. So anyways, that's a little bit about what is.
I have a quick question.
Go for it.
Can you explain what channels are? Never heard of that for email.
So in this case, all the channel means is a structure to sort of determine how you are going to sync particular folders. So the way the channel works for me in this one is this is a channel for, say, this is determining a transform from the remote server to the local store. So this is saying on the remote server, this channel, as it's defined, it's just a way to sort of group these things together. I want to make sure that the trash folder, the capital E trash folder, is channeled to a lowercase t trash folder, and then
Okay.
similarly we'll go back the other way. I think it's more of a paradigm that mbsync does. Like, they have a lot of different things in here that I think are not necessarily standard, but make sense sort of in the context of its own personal configuration. Does that help?
Yeah, I think it does. Basically, from what I understand, you can get basically different folders and do things with them. And so it runs all these channels when you sync it.
Yeah, I would also stress that I have a very, very simple use case,
Hmm.
right? I don't do a lot of different folders. I've sort of taken on the like more Gmail-y kind of way of approaching things, which is, just archive everything and then I'll search for it later, which mu4e works really well with. So I sort of focus on that and have sort of do a rough paradigm when it comes to a rough like setting for what the archive is, what my drafts are, because I'm gonna compose emails, what my sent drive is, and what my trash folder is gonna look like. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Great. All right. Good question. So going on next. So now that we've done that, let's install mu4e. Um, you can't really just install mu4e by itself. It is a part of the larger mu project, which stands for Mail Utilities. So that means having mu provides mu4e. It's not on Melpa. It's not, as far as I know, on Marmalade. There are some distributions of Linux that provide it. My guess is that you might be able to install it through Brew. I'm not positive about that. I've personally built it from source a bunch because I find it to be a pretty easy thing to build from source, and pretty straightforward. So that's what I did. But look into the install guide for how to install it for you if you do plan on using it. So, setting up mu or emu. After it's installed, you get the command line tool mu. So we need to run that in order to initialize that for our mail directory. So we do mu init. We need to pass things like the mail directory that we just created. We need to then also pass the address that you're going to be using. This is a lightweight configuration for how it's going to reference some things to make sure that the email is correct, to make sure that it's looking at the right stuff, make sure that it's indexing the right stuff. And then you also you don't actually need to specify the MU home if you are only using one email account. This is set up very much so that it's for to work with multiple accounts, because that is the use case that I have, and that's the use case that I'm familiar with. But you could omit this if you had only one account, and it would go to a default place. In this case, I believe it's .config/mu in your home directory. So we're going to run this and see what happens. I will say that when you run it, this is the output that comes here. I'm going to run this in the command line down here just because I can't. I will no longer get results because I'm in a read-only buffer right now. So opening this up. Oop, not that. We paste this in. And it says that it's initialized this with my personal address, set the mail directory, has the database path set up. It says that there's 0 messages in store, but I think that's because of how init works. And it's before anything has actually been indexed. But again, this is what it would sort of look like, schema version, all that jazz. Now let's index this mail. We index mail now that we actually have that configuration, we don't need to tell it where that mail is to be indexed because that's what the initializer did. We only need to tell it, in this case, where the mu home is. Again, if you left this off, it would default to a specific place, and that's fine. But I'm going to run this because I do need to index. I'm going to assume that I'm not going to get all of you. Yeah, need to do emacsnycfastmailcom. We hit enter. It has gone through it. It's processed 29 messages, which definitely means that more people have emailed me. If I run it again, it will show me that there are 29 messages in store, and this will tell me how many more would be processed in total. After this, I might show you what it would look like on my own, which has thousands of messages, and it goes through it about as quickly as this. A little bit slower, but not too much slower. So now we have that indexed. And I know that this is a lot of effort, but bear with me. We're almost done. Next thing we need to do is set up mu4e in Emacs. So because it's not installed from a package archive, it means that we have to add it to our load path. So we add it to our load path. We require mu4e. We do set queue for the mu4e user agent. We tell our mail address. This is an Emacs configuration. This is not an mu4e configuration because Emacs, as I said before, has built-in clients, so it has an understanding of how to write and use email. We do need to tell it where our mu or mu home is. And then this little configuration here, the change file names when moving, is an mbsync thing that I will admit, all the documentation that I saw, it basically just said, this is a requirement for mbsync, and didn't see it much else there. My guess is it might be because it actually physically moves a file to another folder as opposed to flagging and tagging and doing anything like that. So that's my assumption. Anyways, as I said, I'm coding this with you, so we're going to run this sequence so that we have this whole thing here and we can actually use mu. One last thing that I'm going to add before we actually go into it is there are a couple of other things that you could add. Is you could do a compose signature really quickly to compose, who you are so that you have a nice little signature. I like to do things like set my attachment directory to a lowercase d downloads because down with capital letters, and then if you want to, I don't use this personally for my command. You could also tell mu4e when updating your email if you were to update your email through there, you could tell it how to do it with mbsync. And this is running mbsync emacsnyc, which is just targeting just that one account. I could also change this to -- all if I wanted to update all of my accounts. So as I said, this is all running together. So we're going to run that. Now let's do it. This is demo time, right? Nope, that's not right.
Survey says.
Survey says we have it. And this was not there before, right? So this is kind of great. But let me embiggen for everybody so that they can see. The first thing that you see is the interface is simple, right? It's command based, right? It's really quick key things. It's not using control a bunch. It's tells you it really informs you how you might want to use these things. Technically, you can use your mouse if you want to, but I tend to read my email not as what is the unread things that I need to go through, because I'm very much into the archive way of doing emails. So I jump directly to my inbox. So I hit J to jump to my inbox. And if you can see barely down here in this teeny tiny text that I want to go to inbox and type that in. Goodbye, empty inbox. There we go. We got a message here. Got one from Zach. Let's run it one more time and see if we got any more. And then I'll go over how we are going to do this. So it looks like we got one other thing. gonna quit out of here just a second because I also need to run the index one more time. And inbox. Ah, look at that. We got one from Adrian too. So very quickly, just an overview of how to use something like this and try to zoom in as well. We can do things like hit enter. We can see where this email is coming from. It stores, it will store the people that have sent you email as like local context so that you can refer back to them later. From this, you can also go down to the next email. Empty message from Zachary. Thank you, Zachary, for the empty message. And I can go through all these things. I would love to keep this message, right? So I'm gonna hit R to archive it. I'm this message from me. I don't want this anymore. So I'm gonna hit D to throw it into my trash. You can do capital D to delete it full stop and just completely get rid of the message so it no longer exists. And does not go to a trash folder. You could you can do an explicit move and say that I want this to randomly go to my sent folder. I don't know why I'm going to do that, but I can do that. And so I can get out of there. You can see all these messages, and now I can hit X and execute all the marks that are here, and I can do that. It gives you other things that you're allowed to do as far as doing a lot of things at once. So I want to make sure that I very quickly trash all the things from me. And so I'm going to do that. And so if you hit shift and percent, or if you do the percent sign, it will ask you what kind of action you want to take and what kind of filter that you want to take on that. So it's very quickly, you can very quickly run through everything that's in your messages to get through. So this is great, right? The other thing that, as I said, very powerful as far as using something like Zapier and doing those indexing is that it becomes very simple to search for things. So I think I sent some stuff to admin at emacsnycfastmailcom at some point. And yep, there it is. So very quickly sees all those messages from a simple search. It gives you the ability to search for people by their address, by the particular mail directory. It's a very robust and pretty powerful search. But then as well, like you can see that the database and the other information that's here, it tells you a little bit about how many messages are in your store and a couple of other things there. Any questions about that or anything else that anybody has would like to know if it can do before we move on to some other things?
Yeah, I have a question. Can you hear me all right?
Yep.
I actually set up mu4e, as I say it in my head. But one of the problems I was having was with deleting versus like archiving or whatever, bringing to all mail rather than the inbox.
Mm-hmm.
So when you delete something, are you able to tell it to automatically take it out of everywhere else and just put it in the trash folder? Does that make sense? Because that's sort of what I've been having trouble with.
So my understanding is that it's set up right now to automatically send it to a /trash folder. And so long as you have mbsync set up so that it will recognize that as that folder, it should manage that pretty well, so long as there's a directory to do so. Is the concern that you're having right now is that it will, if you try to trash it, it will just completely delete it?
No, it sort of happens. I referenced sort of the Gmail web site, gmail.com. And then I'll see the email in the inbox and in all mail and in trash. So somehow I don't know if it duplicates it or it moves it to multiple places. That's just a weird situation I haven't been able to solve.
And this is in Gmail, right?
Yeah, that's right, unfortunately.
I have an old configuration that might be able to help out with that does a pretty good job of doing it. My hope is that all of the comments that we're hearing right now are people saying, you just got to do this. But Gmail makes it very complicated. They have a very strange way that they do IMAP, and it makes it slightly complicated to do any of those things. But I think we should catch up after, and maybe there's something I can help you out with if other people have not helped you out already.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Sure. Anybody else have any other questions? All right. So I'm going to quit here. We've done that. So a couple more odds and ends. There are a couple of quality life things that I think that you can do pretty quickly to make your life a little bit, make life a little bit nicer. So as I said, I like to go to my inbox directly. When you saw that, I hit J to say like the mail directory that I wanted to go to, and then I had to type in enough letters to make sure that the inbox is selected and then go there. If there are particular places that you go more often, you can do mail directory shortcuts, which are just, specify the directory that you like to go to. Whoops. Here, and then give it the question mark I, which will just say when I hit, if I hit J and then I hit I, it will automatically go into it. Or you hit O to say I want to go to another one. That is not very common for you. Another thing that you might want to do, you saw that I was like updating the index here in order to do some stuff. You can tell mu4e to update the index for you. It's so quick that it's something that can be done there. The other thing that you can do, as I said before, is you can tell it to get all of your email too. I don't like to do that because that means that I have to have Emacs open, which I obviously have open at all times, but I like the idea of having it just happen in the background, not having random tasks that are sort of running it inside of Emacs that are backgrounded there and making that work that way. And I've already seen a couple of things where that falls apart a little bit. So instead, what I do is you can set up either a cron job or I use the systemd timer. And if we have a little bit of time after, I can show you what that timer actually looks like. To simply run a mbsync all every 3 minutes, quickly get it out of the way. But I think one thing that you might be thinking as well is passwords. Every single time that you type in mbsync, it kept on saying, we need your password. So we have to improve how we deal with passwords. And this is where I'm going to take the slightest diversion into how to deal with passwords in this situation. I think that there's a situation in which you can, if you have to type in your password every single time, and I think this is true somewhat universally, like you are going to optimize for probably the wrong thing, which is that you're going to optimize for the convenience of being able to type that password in. And not necessarily the security of that password. And sure, there's an entire argument we can have about how text passwords are kind of dumb and we shouldn't be doing them anyways. And that's not the argument that I'm going to have right now because we have what we have right now. But I think that we can set some goals for how we actually want to accomplish this thing and how we want to be able to have a secure password that allows us to use that secure password, maybe allows us to store the use of that password in a session for a bit of time so that we don't have to retype it every single time we use the command. And it allows us to use it in processes that are in cron jobs that will just let you know that it needs that information and then go back and get out of the way. And then, of course, we also want to store it in a secure manner and want it to be accessible by both our sending and receiving a mail. And we'll go into that in a little bit. But so I use the standard Unix password manager, which if you haven't used it before, but are familiar with things like 1Password, LastPass, and those kind of systems, this is like that, but it's set up so that it uses common command line tools like git and pgp and basically is very Unix, it goes with the Unix ethos quite a bit. It's great. There's a lot of community work that's gone around it as well, and it is just the most dead simple kind of system. And so you can store those in a secure vault. I store mine in a PGP encrypted with my PGP key that is then pushed up to a Git server that is my own, not GitHub's, so that I know where it is and I don't have to worry about anybody seeing the passwords that I have. But you can use anything that you want, really. Anything that has easy command line retrieval works. 1Password I know has easy command line retrieval. It has a command line that works pretty well, and you could use something like that. basically anything that would have a command line interface would be something that could work pretty well. The benefit that I've found with something like Pass is that because it uses PGP, you can use something like the GPG agent, which does store a session of that successful use to then unlock things later on. And so that's I cannot tell you enough how the standard Unix password manager is great. It just works really well. So what I can do then before I go there, what I can do then if I have that is if we go to the mbsync and then go up to this thing here and say run a password command, which is the command line of pass, get me the fastmail.com/laptop emacsnyc. When I run mbsync again, it's not going to ask for a password, it's just going to work, right? So let's get rid of the verbose. It runs that command because I've used this recently. It's stored a session of my PGP key and works with that. The other thing to note is that if you're using things like app passwords, they're not something that you can write typically. They're typically things that are generated. So it's definitely hard to remember something that's generated, right? And that kind of system doesn't work as well. Anybody have any questions about that before I move on? We're almost done.
Yeah, I just typed it, but is mbsync? I don't really get the dependency tree because I've never tried to use mu4e, but I've used stuff like mutt before, terminal. I'm sure all you guys have played around with that one. It's just a terminal-based email client. So I just don't really like. I know you could mu4e. It's in Emacs, but what happens? What are you doing here in on your Linux system to prep or whatever's going on?
So that's where that's where I was talking about how mu4e requires you to have a local copy of your email stored on your device, so that it has a mail directory that it would then index from there. The part that I'm talking about with the standard Unix password manager is making sure that if you are querying your email service, rather than having to enter a password every single time you query it, especially in my case where I query it every 3 minutes while I'm using my computer.
No, I got that part. You're just using GNU Pass, I'm guessing, to store your passwords not in plain text.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah. So, but the part I've used stuff like offline IMAP to store my mail locally on the Linux system, but it either got deprecated or sucks, or and I stopped using it 4 years back or so for whatever reason. So you're using just to get this straight, you're using mbsync to pull the mail down to your system, and then you're doing all the things with mu4e.
Yeah, and then mu4e looks at that local copy, indexes that local copy, and then makes it so that they can then use. Then it makes it so that that mail is accessible inside of mu4e. So mu is the command line interface that allows you to index those things, and then mu4e is the Emacs front end for mu.
What's mu? mbsync?
No, mu is the larger project for mu4e. So mu stands for mail utilities, and then mu4e stands for mail utilities for Emacs.
So you've installed mu,
and that gives
mbsync.
you. Yep, and that gives you. If you install mu, it gives you mu4e, and mu4e is the thing that will index all those things, and then mu4e will be the thing that will then be the front end so that you can see those. And so it needs.
So you're installing mu on the Linux level, mbsync in the Linux level, and then you're I don't know if it's a package mu4e or if it's probably part of Emacs at this point, but
it's a package that lives inside of mu. But yeah, it's basically a package for Emacs, and then it makes it so that we can then see those things, and then to that point, you use offline IMAP. mbsync is basically the same thing as offline IMAP. I have found it personally to be a lot faster, and that's part of the reason why I use it.
Yeah, I remember it. Something happened with offline IMAP a while back. It put me off to the whole.
I think it's still around. I think it's pretty active, and I think it has some, it got some renewed energy for like OAuth stuff, somewhat recently. But yeah, I mean, you know, still good. I think it was just didn't quite meet the needs that I had.
Cool. Thanks for the stack rundown.
Sure. Anybody else have any other questions before we get into sending mail?
One quick question.
Sure.
Sorry, I hopped on a little bit late. Let me know if it's earlier on in the recording.
Sure.
Did we cover how to delineate different mailboxes if you're pulling from multiple mail sources?
No, we're gonna do that in a little bit.
All right, looking forward to it. Thanks.
Great. So how to send mail. So we've been able to read mail, but we can't send it yet. So I use MSMTP, which is a SendMail compatible service. SendMail is sort of the de facto standard for how to send emails. There are some that just do have, I think, slightly faster, slightly different configuration processes that make it kind of easy. So I'm just going to go really quickly into what this looks like and show you just how simple this is. So these things are more or less what you would have. The defaults, I gotta do that. Defaults, auth on, TLS on, port 587. These, I think, are sort of, the defaults give you sensible defaults for all the fields that aren't shown. Auth, just make sure that authentication is turned on for your accounts. Making sure that you have TLS on, like setting these configurations sort of as like boilerplate for getting things running. And so like mbsync, this separates things out seemingly by chunks. So, you know, if I, for example, wanted to have another account, I could say account and then start another account. There's also a difference between, say, from and user. And part of the reason for that is that you can definitely have services that have the same user, but different email addresses on those users. I, for example, have my personal account, which has my personal email, but then I also use that for my admin at emacsnyc.org email too. And so if you wanted to add a separate email, you could just say like foo as your separate account. This could work off of the emacsnyc account here, and then the lines after that will be a direct copy of all the things that are here, and you can just change how these go. And so in my case, I say admin at emacsnyc.org, and that is another account that I can send from using mbsync. Or not mbsync, MSMTP. Another thing that we had talked about before with the passwords, I don't want to type in passwords, and MSMTP also doesn't let you do typing in passwords in a reasonable way. So you either have it saved in plain text, which, whoops, that's not great. Or you do password eval and pass it the command line that you want it to do. So in this case, it's the same thing that I had before, which is the laptop emacsnyc. And this will grab that password. If I have not authenticated that in a while, I have my GPG agent set up to pop up a window called pin entry that will ask me to type in my password, and I'll type in my password. Any questions about this before we move on? I think it's pretty straightforward. It's I think even easier than mbsync because you don't have to worry about the various channels. It's just sending mail. So let's ensure this is set up. I am going to do the same thing that I did last time, which is I'm going to get rid of the thing that I have currently on my system in favor of the one that is set up in this folder. So let's do that. I also need to run this, but let's talk a little bit about what this is doing. So don't reply to yourself, true, which just means probably what it sounds like. I don't want to reply to me. If I hit reply, it tries to find the right people to reply to, and this sort of ensures that I will not reply to myself. because this is all these other settings are not specifically for mu4e. These are general things on how to send email inside of Emacs, and are Emacs configurations that you can just put in. So this is, we set it to send mail with sendmail. So this is sendmail as a program. We tell the sendmail program that we want to use. In this case, it's MSMTP. I'm getting really good at saying MSMTP, which for a long time it would be SMTEM to PIPA, and like it just didn't work out. The other thing that we have here is extra arguments, read from envelope from, and F is evil true. So the read from envelope from means that it looks at who the message is being sent from. So in this case, emacsnyc at fastmail.com. It will check that to determine which count is there. Typically, what the MSMTP will do is it will require you to pass in a user. But as I said, you can have multiple emails associated to a single user, so it won't know which one to pick. So instead of trying to figure out who to send from based upon the user, we do it always from the email that is being sent from. So I think I already did this, but we're going to do it again. And now let's go back and let's run this. So I'm gonna mbsync this thing. Let's see if I got any more emails. Doesn't look like it. Oh, that's already running. That's because this is running. And let's see what's in here. I didn't actually run that other command. Nobody responded to me, but let's go for a compose to the, and just so we can see this, admin at emacsnyc.org. We'll do a CC to, I don't know, we'll just do a CC to the same email address because I want to also know whatever I sent there, and say, hello from this email. You are super cool. And now I hit Control C, and it sends. And because I don't have that background process happening, I have to reindex. Let's do that. I did an update inside of here, and now I can see in my inbox that I got this email, and it's, as you can see, in a inside of a thread. These can get pretty deep. Just FYI. So you're super cool. This was sent to Emacs NYC. And that's it. As far as sending is concerned. Anybody else have any questions about sending before we go into multiple accounts? And then I promise it will be very quick after that.
I think Daniel Murphy raised his hand. If you want to ask your question, Daniel.
Go for it. Go for it.
I see the magic snippet of mu4e context that has eluded me for a very long time. Are we going to circle back on this later?
We're going to do this right now.
Ah, beautiful. All right. I've been on the edge of my seat the whole time for this.
Oh, I'm so excited. I'm glad that you're excited about this. And hopefully it will get it set up so that it works well for you. I don't know if that's true, but hopefully it does. Anybody have any other sending questions before we get on to multiple accounts? Okay, so mu4e has context, which is the way that it deals with multiple accounts. It means that you can switch between these contexts in order to deal with those accounts. One thing to kind of note here is that naming is kind of important. So mu4e focuses on doesn't really have a concept of folders so much as it has concepts of indexes. I mean, it has an index to work from. So it searches for the thing that is in a folder of index. So if you have multiple contexts that have an inbox, then if you go into that inbox, it will show you the mail for multiple different accounts. So that doesn't have any bearing on this, but if, say, for example, you want to do things like compose from a specific email or anything like that, this is the way to do it. But it also is the way to figure out how it should manipulate each message if you are seeing overlaps of each of them. So one thing to note is that you must have a unique name for each one of these contexts. So pretty simple setup. It's a, I think this is a plist. Forgetting about that. But it's an argument. There are arguments in here that tell you a little bit about each one of the contexts. So you say make a context. You specify the name that it has. It has to have a match function. The match function is particularly important for dealing with things like how should you compose a message when you are dealing with things, but also if you are moving a file, if you are in, and I'm gonna do that, if you are in, say, if you are in a directory where you're able to see files from a bunch of different accounts, this match function will determine how you how you do things, how you act on each one of those accounts. So right now, this is only focusing on just the emacsnycfastmailcom, but if I had multiple accounts, I'd probably wanted to match on, or I would want it to, if I had multiple accounts that were on the, if I had multiple emails on the same account, I'd probably want to match on multiple emails. So this match function is, they say it's only for composition, but there are other things in their documentation that say it's like, it's about moving files, and it's like, when I do an action, make sure to check where I should actually go, and unless you specifically say, always ask me where I should go, do that. Leave function, you clear caches, I think for the sake of clearing caches. The next part that's really important is the variable section. I think that it's important to note that these variables here match very closely to, match exactly to the set q variables that we were setting beforehand. So this is a way for it to sort of temporarily set these things for a specific account, or check these things in the context of, in this context, right? So these will match directly here, and this is a replacement in a way for the various different variables that we had set up in a few previous slides, where I had set user mail address like that. And so if I run this particular thing, you'll see what happens here. Buffers read only. Yeah, that makes sense because I have not set this up to do that. I'll just do it like this. If you take a look at, if we now go into mu4e, it will ask me, you can't hardly see it at the bottom here, but it will ask me if I want to use, which context I want to use. And I'm going to say here Emacs. And so it says on the bottom here that I'm using the Emacs NYC context. If I were to have other accounts, it would change that based upon those. When I worked at Thoughtbot, it would change to the Thoughtbot context. But as I said, the way that I had set this up, and happy to share my own configuration about this and even show some of the things that I had previously, is that I had it set up so that the inbox, because each of them went to a lowercase I inbox, I would see all of my mail in one place, but when I would manage that mail, it would go into separate places. Likewise, if you want to change where each one of these accounts or each one of these things, where you look for each one of these mail directories and specify those, if you are using something outside of sort of the standard lowercase I inbox, lowercase a archive, lowercase t trash, draft, and sent, you would specify those here. You would say like the mu4e mail, you would mu4e like inbox directory, or inbox mail directory, or mail directory inbox. I can't remember exactly what they are for, what the exact names are, but that would be a way for you in this context to specify what you want each one of those to work with in here, and say, I want different directories for each of these. But again, my goal was to keep it all in one place so that I could do it, so I wouldn't have multiple places that I'd look, and just know that they were going to the right places at the right times, and I was archiving them the right way. And it was smart about it. It was surprisingly smart about it. Daniel, I think it was Daniel. Does that answer your question at all, or are there other things that you want to catch up on after this?
I don't think I ever matched up the context names with the username fields. I tried to make them more user-friendly than literate.
Oh,
and
I see.
think that's what got me, because this part of mu4e is not very deeply documented.
No, I'm happy to walk through with you anything about that and see if there's anything that we can do to improve your life with it.
That and the line in MSMTP to figure out the past sent email address.
We got lots of work.
Third time of replying on my personal email to work chain, I stopped using it. That is such a noob move.
Yeah, let's work it out. The valuable thing is to get rid of the one where you set a default, because that is a bad thing.
Yes.
I find. Anybody else have any other questions that they want to ask before we move on? We're almost done. I know I keep on saying that. All right. Very quickly, signing and encrypting with mail, your mail using PGP. Securing your thing with PGP is something that is based in Emacs, so it's not something that is about mu4e, but it works with it really nicely. So long as we set our PGP key in here, this is mine, and then in this case, I want to sign each message when I get into a compose, as opposed to encrypting there. Also, partially because the email address that I'm using isn't on my PGP key, so I'm not going to bother with that. But if we take a look at mu4e, I'll compose something from me again. And what you'll see here is that we have the secure method PGP mime sign that is added here, which will add a file that says this is how it's signed, and you can verify against that. And so this, by the way, if we were to run that other command to do encrypt message encrypt, yeah, that one. You notice that it just changed this mode from sign to encrypt, basically the same thing. And so you can also change this yourself too. It just is a slightly more convenient function to be able to do that. And what Emacs will do is it will also verify those things for you automatically. mu4e works with that pretty nicely too. It can decrypt automatically too, assuming that you have the appropriate private key. It's pretty great. It's like surprisingly seamless. I have definitely screwed it up beforehand trying to set things at as I was composing or as I was about to send, so I don't recommend doing that. If Harry's still here, he can probably tell you the time where I meant to encrypt something back to him and actually signed it. So yeah, that was embarrassing. So setting it up when you go to compose is sort of the way that I've done it, or if you want to run that command manually yourself is a good way to go. But on compose hooks, great way to go, and really good. Org capture is also a thing. I'm not going to go into too much detail on this. I use org capture. I use org capture for my mail a ton. So if there's something that comes in that needs my attention, I will capture it as a mail inbox so that I can deal with that later, and make it so that I will check on that after the fact, because that's where I want to see all of my things. My inbox, my mail inbox is not my personal inbox exactly, right? And it's not how I filter things. So if you are using org capture, it's a really great way to manage that. So if, for example, I have this thing from Adrian that say I wanted to capture, I have my capture templates here. I type in mail and it says, "Hi NYC meetup." It expands from that %a expansion that's there. So really great, and this links directly back to that email. mu4e knows how to manage that thing. Great system for it. And then, so back to the presentation. There's a list of other features that you can probably get for this too. Sauron is made by the same person, and it's good for emailing alerts. I haven't used it yet. I actually plan on giving it a try. I have used mu4e alerts. It works fine. I think that I'd like to have a system that doesn't actually involve me having mu4e open in order to use it. So I think Sauron might be able to do that. Custom markers for quick actions, unreproducible swaths. So I've created custom things that are like, I want to always, for these messages, like if I get a whole bunch of Trello things, I want to be able to mark all those Trello things really quickly, but I think it's also important that I get all of them, even if I don't read all of them. Things like that. Smart refiling is definitely a thing too. So this is the idea that you can say, I want to refile this, as opposed to it automatically going to the archive. You can set up parameters that say, given this type of message, I want it to go to this kind of folder anytime I refile. It's probably quite powerful. I don't use it, but probably powerful. And that's it. That was a lot, right? Try to be brief. Does anybody have any questions?
Could you easily demo org capture? I've been using org mode for 5 years. I never even bothered paying attention to it. It looks like it's just a pop-up where you take a quick note. If that's really what it is, it'd be cool to see how it works.
It's
kind of adjacent topic though.
It is definitely a thing where it's just to take a quick note, but it's it works really well in depending upon the framework that you want to use. It's like if you have an idea, you want to just jot something down so that you deal with it later. It works really well. I've personally found in the like getting things done kind of framework of like just throw a whole bunch of things into an inbox that you want to manage a little bit later, and that's sort of how I use it.
Are you still sharing your screen? Is it a thing you could demo in 10 seconds? If not, I'll Google up some videos of it.
I mean, I hit Control-C, and then it tells me the capture things that I want to do. I have a couple things set. I have my inbox, which allows me just to type something in here, and then when
that's not your mail inbox. That's like your org.
This is my org inbox.
Right.
And if I hit Control-C, it will then commit that there. If I could do Control-C, Control-K, it will get rid of it. There's my mail inbox, which this isn't going to work here. This is just taking whatever the last linked thing was, but it's really about mail for me. And so I wouldn't I showed you how I use that in the context of reading my email. For things like, I actually want to make sure that I don't have like my password copied or something like that. But if I have something that I want to quickly throw into, that I just want to copy down really quickly and then throw that into my inbox, I have Control-C, and then C. And then it puts that down here as a copy of that thing. And then I say like, think about this a lot.
Yeah, this feels good for maybe you find a URL that you want to save or something.
Yeah.
Comes to mind that.
And like,
that's cool.
If there are things that I know that I need to do, if there are things that I know that I need to do around the house, most of this stuff goes away. I do have my RSS feed set up using org mode, so will directly feed into my RSS feeds. If I want to add something to that, I very rarely use it, but I have it there.
Which is, how do you read your feeds? Dare we go down that rabbit hole for a second?
We're going down a lot of rabbit holes. I use lfeed, highly recommend, but I'm not going to go into too much detail about that. But org capture is great, and I would encourage you to reach. I would encourage you to reach out to it. It's not so much in like, it's a very powerful tool if you choose to use it as if you like figure out what works for you when using it, because it's not necessarily that good just like it's not going to solve a problem unless you have a problem that you need to specifically solve with it.
No, that's kind of the flavor of all things org mode.
Yeah, just about. Does anybody else have any other questions?
One question.
Sure.
In the same way that I often have trouble in Emacs if I load a file that's slightly too big, if you navigate to a context that has, a couple thousand emails, do you experience a similar slowness?
That's a good question. I really haven't, but that's also largely because I archive really quickly, but it's not even, it doesn't load all those things in, right? It loads in a portion of them, and it's because everything's loaded in, because the things are all local on your system, it's not querying all that right away when you change a context. It's going to query that when you decide to go to a particular mail directory. And that, I believe it also only limits the amount that it shows. So I don't think that you ever really get into a scenario in which you see way too much.
Gotcha. Okay, that's good to know. And the only other questions I have are not mu specific, but they're sync specific, because that's probably the most intimidating part, is choosing a. I mean, I know John Weigley decided to put a whole mail server on his computer, and it seems like a surefire, although busy way to achieve that. But yeah, if that's too far off topic, we don't have to go into that.
It's certainly a pretty intense topic, and I would totally agree with you that it is a complicated thing, especially because I think that the configuration that you have for something like offline IMAP or mbsync has to reflect how you think about how you use email. And so in my case, just to go back to that one, the way that I think about it is that I have my inbox. In this case, it grabs the pattern for what inbox means as far as fast mail is concerned. And then, it does the simple transforms here. Like if I wanted to keep this the same, I could say that I wanted to keep it as uppercase archive, and then I'd have to tell mu4e that like my archive folder or my refile folder is a capital A archive. But I think it's largely depends upon how you do. If you're kind of a folder heavy person, maybe you're going to be putting a whole lot of folders here and trying to make it work that way for you so that when you refile, you are going to specific folders. The one thing that I would say about this that I think works really well for me is that if you think about each one of these as individual folders and you think about sort of this as just being the thing that it's like, how do we determine how to get all of your email into this inbox? That's what this is doing. And then every other one of these is how can we transform this to work for mu4e? And that's where it gets kind of complicated when it comes to things like Gmail. I mean, I might be able to find pretty quickly like my github.com/ like how I used to set up my Gmail account for these things. And let's see, mbsync. So like this is my current thing. Again, not too much different, but if I look at the history of it and look at readjust to a new password scheme, like we can browse this file, look at mbsync, like, oh, nope, undo. You can see that for the parts where I dealt with, like how I deal with Gmail, it's like for the archive, it was called Gmail all mail, and then it went to archive like that. This is Gmail drafts. Sent mail was its own thing. I guess I didn't set up a trash folder for this, but like you have to sort of have it reflect the things that you are trying to how you think about it, but then also has to reflect the service that you're using too.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Anything else?
If you're using Gmail, just remember skim the chat for what's his name? Jake's got a couple links of 2 things you gotta enable on the gmail.com side, or else it's probably gonna yell at you when you're trying to authenticate.
That's true. Yeah. But I think that's I haven't gone into the configuration of that, and I think there's more that we can talk about as far as like configuring each service to work appropriately too. It's a little bit of a rabbit hole, but I hope this is condensed enough to sort of give people a little bit more confidence in the things that they're trying to do. Okay. Anybody else have any other questions before I turn off the recording?
What is the main difference between MUT and mu4e? I've only ever tried mu4e. I've seen that that's a long-standing recommendation. I've seen very few recommendations from MUT, but I know it's very popular nonetheless.
Very popular for people that I found a lot of Vim users that use MUT. I don't know enough about MUT to give you a good understanding of that. I feel like there might be some people here that could probably speak to that better than I could.
So MUT's a Linux program, runs in the CLI. You set up your configuration. It like you sort of pointed at a MU or what was that other thing we were talking about that collects the email?
mbsync.
Yeah, offline IMAP.
Yeah.
And you set up your outgoing servers, but it's a text-based email client in Linux, and then you can actually use so like all sort of text Linux programs, it'll ask you when you come time to compose an email, you can set VI or Vim as your editor. You could set Nano as your editor. You could set Emacs as your editor, for example. So that at that point, you're actually allowed to hand off your message to Emacs. It's not, you're not living in Emacs. You're just handing it over to it. This mu4e looks like you live in Emacs. So that would be MUT's relationship to Emacs, but probably most people just use it in the command line if you're not an Emacs user. And I think the default editor may even be Vim or VI. And when you start composing a message, it'll pop open VI. You do your messages, you close your buffer, and then you send off the message.
Yeah, I used MUT for a few years before switching to mu4e, and I was using Emacs as my editor. It's not that bad. It's not super different. MUT is just an interface to this whole directory of emails in the same way that mu4e is. mu4e is a little bit nicer because you can do things like org capture that Eric demoed. And, you know, if I'm writing text, I want to do it in a text editor. Seems right.
Yeah, that's fair. Definitely know plenty of people that have used MUT. Anybody else have any other questions? Great.